Handling business. Los Angeles, Port of Long Beach. 1:22 a.m. A cold breeze pulled at the tags and tall standing flags on the port. The wind chill made Elliot Bleecker pull the top of his jacket up over his mouth and try to retain some warmth as he bounced in place trying to stay mobile. His eyes shifted along the port for any sign of his boss, who had sent him to get some paperwork at the last minute, but it was so dark he may as well be trying to make the man manifest by sheer force of will. And only where it was more crucial, meaning he was pretty much stuck alone, in the cold, in the dark, but he had been trying to warm up to the boss for days now with practically nothing to show for it. I got him takeout. I offered to grab him coffee every morning. He probably doesn't even know my name except on payroll. Hard ass. It's like trying to get some affection from an emotionally distant parent. Jesus. He pushed his hands deeper into his front jacket pockets, the denim doing little to keep his hands warm. He bounced again and saw a pair of headlights driving up to him from the North Port entrance. His relief was immeasurable. God, I can't wait to get home. I hope Bev put some leftovers in the microwave for me. The car pulled up to stop in front of him. A sleek, black, car. It was fancy looking, and honestly, one of the biggest reasons he and his father hadn't spent much time together was Elliot knew nothing about cars and had no interest in learning. He rushed up to the passenger side window to look inside. I wish I had that suit. As usual, his boss looked great. Strong jaw, high cheekbones, just overall handsome, with a slightly darker skin tone that easily marked him as some kind of Latino, but still pale enough to pass for Caucasian with a good tan. The man was fit and well built in an expensive gray suit with a white silk shirt and platinum Rolex. If I had his money. God, how he envied Antonio Salamanca and the man's charmed existence. God clearly had favorites. The window rolled down and Antonio smiled at him. "You just gonna stand there? Get in before you catch something. You got the papers." Elliot didn't hesitate to climb into his boss's car and enjoy the warm leather upholstery and heater. He let a groan slip and took a second to just lean his head back and sigh in satisfaction. Recovering, he lowered his head and nodded. "Yeah, right here." He unzipped his jacket to pull out the papers he had kept against his chest so he could keep his hands in his pockets. He passed them over to Mr. Salamanca, who took them and flipped through them. He had already looked at the papers before, but they didn't seem at all that important to him. Well, in the right hands, it was still a valuable manifest and financial paperwork, but still, he hadn't seen anything that stood out. "Thanks for getting this for me," Mr. Salamanca said, flipping a page. Elliot shifted uncomfortably. He's in a good mood. Maybe I can strike up a conversation? "It's, no problem, sir. Really. Is it everything you needed? I made sure I used your words specifically," he said. Mr. Salamanca put the papers down on the center console and looked over at him with a raised brow. "Do that a lot, don't you?" Antonio asked with a smile. Elliot opened his mouth and closed it, trying to consider his words. "Not in the day-to-day, but you set a good example. I mean, who wouldn't want to be a little more like you?" he said, adding a laugh at the end that he didn't quite feel. Mr. Salamanca leaned back into his seat. "Well, I appreciate the flattery and the dedication. I pay attention to the people around me, and you've definitely come to my attention for your work," Antonio said. Elliot beamed. Yes, finally! Took long enough. "Let me drive you back to your car," Mr. Salamanca said. "Yeah, thanks. I'm parked right up by the front gate." Elliot quickly answered, looking out the passenger window at the cold outside. "Thank you very much. Lord knows I didn't want to walk back in this." Elliot was broken out of his thoughts, trying to put together something to say to keep conversation going and take advantage of the situation to getting good with Mr. Salamanca. "You know, if you need someone to help you out in the office, I'd be happy to lend a hand and take on some extra work," he said. Antonio nodded. Maybe. But I'm picky about who I work with. Too many people have secrets. You have any secrets, Elliot? Mr. Salamanca asked. Sweat immediately beaded on Elliot's upper lip. He wiped it away quickly. No, Mr. Salamanca. The car stopped. They were out of the light's edges and surrounded by cargo containers on the right and a ship docked at port on the left. Don't lie to me, leaker, Mr. Salamanca said. Elliot looked back at him and was admittedly somewhat taken aback. It was like looking at a completely different man. Gone was the friendly employer. All warmth was just gone. His eyes seemed to become black holes boring into Elliot's chest as the shadows fell over his face. His body, no longer relaxed, was coiled like a snake ready to strike. Elliot swallowed. I'm not. I don't know what you're talking about. Look, I'll just walk back to my car. Sorry for upsetting you, sir, he quickly said. Calmly as he could, he tried to open the door. Antonio grabbed him by the collar and yanked him back in the car before locking it. Who have you been talking to? He demanded, his voice a low, deadly serious tone. Elliot shoved at him and Antonio refused to let go. Get off me, Elliot shouted. Antonio released his collar and with lightning reflexes snatched Elliot by the back of his head. He slammed his face into the dashboard so hard the hard plastic dented and Elliot's nose broke with a loud snap, blood gushing down his face. Answer me, Antonio growled. Digging his hand into his jacket, Elliot grabbed the snub nose he had been given and pressed it to the side of Antonio's neck and fired. Blood spurted out of Mr. Salamanca's neck, coating the driver's side window and leaving a hole in the glass surrounded by a series of cracks. The blood eked along, making a macabre art piece. Antonio fell forward, his face landing against the steering wheel. Breathing heavily, Elliot pulled his cell phone out and quickly dialed the number of his contact. It was excruciating while he waited for him to pick up. Click. Yes. The smooth voice came in a long sigh. It's Bleecker. Antonio found out I was talking to you, and, I had... His mouth was dry. The voice on the other end sucked their breath in and sighed. He heard the heavy breathing and creaking on the other end. What the hell is this guy getting off while I'm trying to talk to him? Not over the phone. Meet at the usual place in Sandy D. You're gonna be all right. The voice answered, elongating the last word. Yeah, of course. I'll see you then, Mr. Zentosa. He hung up. So that's who you've been talking to? Antonio's voice came, sounding a bit off, a little gurgly. And Elliot jumped, dropping his phone to the floor as he looked over to see Antonio pulling his face off the steering wheel. His throat healed, only a pink patch of flesh to show he was shot. What the fuck? What the fuck? What the fuck? The car unlocked and Elliot immediately tried to get out, only to feel a sharp pain in his lower back as Antonio kicked him out of the car, making him land on his stomach on the wet port ground. Elliot began to push himself up. He could hear a car door open and close. Halfway to his feet, Antonio was at his side and kicked him in the ribs, forcing him to roll over onto his back. Elliot swatted and tried to beat him off, but the man suddenly had a grip like iron. Elliot was struck in the face so hard it made the back of his head make contact with the concrete beneath him. Again he was struck, and again and again and again, until Antonio stepped over him and stomped on his face, dislocating his jaw, followed by a swift kick to the ribs again. Elliot gurgled. Through his broken jaw, tears streaming down his face as he tried to speak. Antonio walked away. Sobbing in pain, Elliot was just happy it was over. He was in so much pain. The sound of Antonio's fine wingtips came back. No, please. Stinking warm liquid began to fall over Elliot, causing him to sputter and retch. The stink invaded his nose, and due to the pain and damage to it, It was hard to tell, but he realized, just as he saw through his remaining good eye, a light came into being by Antonio's face. It was gasoline. The lit box of matches was tossed onto him, and he screamed. Fixing his cufflinks, Antonio walked back to the passenger side of his car and leaned in with one open hand holding onto the roof. He scooped up Bleeker's cell phone and slid it open. Pizza place, burger joint, dry cleaners, pizza place, wife. Going into the pictures, he saw a picture of the pregnant blonde amidst the many pictures of fancy suits and houses. Straightening his collar with one hand, Antonio rubbed his neck, still recovering from the gunshot. At least you didn't leave me a lot of loose ends to deal with. He turned off the phone, pulled it open, and took out the SIM card, snapping it in half. Reaching into his jacket, he pulled out his .45 caliber 1911 and ran the man's address through his head before he caught himself. He let out a deep breath. Falling into the passenger seat, he called his domator. She wouldn't want him to handle this as he would have. But if he had to, he'd protect her.